My friends and I were playing video games on the sofa late one Sunday morning when there was a knock at the front door. Julie and Marcus were both too hungover to notice, and it was my house anyway, so I got up to answer it. Though I hadn't partaken in the previous night's libations, I had gone to bed as late and slept as late as they had. I was still groggy. By the time I opened the door, there was only a package and no sign of the person who had delivered it. It was one of those yellow, padded shipping envelopes, and it looked damp. There hadn't been rain as far as I knew, nor had I been expecting any packages. I could feel the greasy wetness on its surface. I brought the package inside and wiped it off. There was no shipping label, return address, or postage, as if whoever had prepared the package had delivered it themselves. I told my friends about the mysterious package and the weird fluid covering it. Julie said to not, in any circumstances, open that thing like that. Marcus said I absolutely had to open it. Eventually, Julie changed her mind, I think because she got curious too. I set the package down on my kitchen table. Julie and Marcus came over to watch me open it. Inside were two waterlogged VHS tapes. They were unlabeled. We could have stopped there. We could have done what was sensible and thrown them away. I was leaning in that direction, seeing as how I had no way to even try to play them without a VHS player, when Marcus commented on the old junk in my garage. It reminded me of a discount TV with a built-in VHS player that I still had from my college years because Goodwill wouldn't even take it. I never could figure out what to do with the thing. My big fat mouth blurted that there was in fact a way to play those tapes, if they could be played, and it was sitting in my garage. I couldn't care less whether those waterlogged tapes broke it. I did the best I could to clean the junk off of the VHS tapes. I kept telling my friends they probably weren't going to work. I don't know what we expected to find on those tapes if they even worked. Considering the nature in which the package had been delivered, the idea that they might be the recordings of some kind of illegal activity, to put it lightly, was probably on the forefront of all of our minds. I can't remember exactly what I was thinking when I put the first tape in and pressed play. We were in the musty heat of the garage, surrounded by oil stains, lawn equipment, and old electronics I should have gotten rid of ages ago. I had put the TV with the built-in VHS player on top of the storage shelf and plugged it in there. And I had set out a plastic lawn chair for each of us to sit in the garage. I'm not sure why I didn't bring it inside. Maybe it was an attempt to keep whatever it contained to my garage. As the first tape played, our eyes were met with the footage that was so murky, I at first thought the tape wasn't working properly. Then one of us said somebody had shot this footage underwater, and footage is exactly what it seemed to be. Not an edited film, only footage. There was no voiceover or anything like that. I'm not sure if it was our eyes adjusting, kind of like one's eyes adjusting to the darkness or those optical illusion puzzles that seemed to be all the rage in the early 90s. Or maybe it was some adjustment that had been made on the camera's end. But as we watched, it became easier to peer through the brownish green murk of the water. We started to point out shapes. Before long, we thought we could identify some of them. Bolts, nuts, colonies of nails, and fractured gears littered to the bed of the waterway it was. There were shopping carts, networks of corded metal beams, and near gleaniest wires. Scrap metals and drinking containers competed for real estate. Things like bathtubs, refrigerators, and rails stuck out of the rubble from buildings. Plums from pus-colored substance jetted like gas from the vents of certain composite structures. Beyond, the sunken ships and what might have been airplanes swirled distantly. It was like a vast underwater junkyard. I didn't know whether it was possible to glimpse the true seabed or lake bed under everything else. The underwater camera moved. At first, it was so subtle we could barely tell, but that movement gained momentum until it was roaming along at an even pace. The camera would swivel or zoom occasionally, then it would slow again for a while before speeding back up. As the camera's movement became more obvious, some animatronic figures that dwelt down there were shown to us. We got glimpses of human-sized mouse animatron that was dressed like a Viking. It had one of those characteristic horned helmets, the helmets that Vikings never actually wore, and it had a rusty sword that was fused to the nub of its hand. We began calling him Viking Mouse every time we pointed him out. He was like something from a defunct amusement park or family entertainment center that, for all we knew, had never existed. One side of his face had been eaten away by the water or other forces, so that when it was close up, I could see the mechanical socket with its bulbous fake eye. More, I could tell where those manufactured teeth met the machinery and wire of the jaw. Even the parts of the hair-covered plastic flesh that weren't worn away had been quartered in the distorted look. Viking Mouse still worked and was powered somehow, maybe by a battery, even as deep under the water as it was. The movements of his arm when it flourished its sword and the silent flapping of its mouth actually caused it to travel around the water. It would meet the camera at different destinations. Another recurring object was this Loch Ness monster-like statue or animatron. Whenever it moved on its own, was moved by someone else, or there were replicas, it too would appear at different locations as the camera swiveled and navigated through those waters. It had bulging eyes and a grin that would make a crocodile's look friendly. There was also this giant snake-like thing that swam around. It was without skin. I could make out the gooey wiring and rusted joints when it loomed particularly close. The camera went inside the bellies of some of those giant ships and aircraft. They were so distorted by the water and their corrosion that they couldn't have been alien technology for all we knew. The camera went inside those Leviathan shapes and gave us close-ups of particular mechanical globs within. I don't know where the lightning came from. Wherever the camera, something in the water or something above. Maybe it came from a combination of sources. As the tapes played on, there was a kind of order to what we'd first taken from Mayer's footage. It's difficult to say just what that order was, but it was there. Several times while watching, I had to remind myself to breathe, as if I had been holding my breath underwater. Not only that, but I'd feel dizzy and have trouble concentrating. I could chalk those sensations up to fear, but I don't know. I don't think it was only that. Hearing Marcus and Julie's sudden outrush of breath at certain intervals suggested to me that they were having similar sensations. We watched all of the footage from both tapes, strangely unable to stop. Hours passed. We sweated so much in the garage that I had to bring over a fan, while being sure not to let myself look away. The second tape ended with the animatronic Viking mouse coming towards the camera. Its mouth flapped more quickly than usual, like there was something it desperately wanted to communicate. Its eyes tinked back and forth and circled around. Its degraded, machinery-poked face slammed into the camera, giving us the closest possible view of what we really didn't want to see but couldn't stop ourselves from viewing. And then, the footage stopped. We were screwed up after watching those two tapes. We kept talking about them and trying to laugh, but we couldn't understand why or how. We could not unscrew ourselves. Eventually, Julie and Marcus went home so they could prepare for their respective work weeks. I spent the rest of that Saturday unable to sleep. The next morning, Monday morning, when I stumbled out to pick up the beer and soda cans we'd left out that Saturday night, I found a rust-colored puddle in the middle of the grass where a few of the aluminum cans were. Maybe it did rain, I thought. When I bent to pick up those cans that were in the puddle, my fingers touched a harder metal than aluminum. I picked out a few 1-inch steel bolts. They were as rusty as the water. Carceri came away in my hands like the decomposing flesh of a toad. That was weird enough, but the next day, the puddle was even larger. It had not rained. I had been home all day. When I reached a hand inside that time, I found that there were new things within. There was a hammer, some nails, something that might have once been a scalpel, and a weird goopy substance that reminded me of what was in the bowels of one of those underwater ships. And there were more bolts, even after I had gotten the others out. I called Marcus and Julie. They came over the next day right before the sun set. By then, the puddle had become a pond. We watched the setting sun blaze it, the color of blood. Instead of koi fish for a fun little koi pond, there were rails and bars jutting from the bottom. We couldn't see into it very well, but we could feel them when we reached inside. Notwithstanding the coloring from the sunset, it was easy to tell that the true color was becoming closer to brownish green. Julie and Marcus and I paced around this pond that had appeared out of nowhere. We talked about all the logical explanations we could until we were sick to our stomachs. Someone's screwing with us. Maybe the same person who had left those tapes. An underground reservoir opening up because of a seismic activity. A reservoir that happened to have old junk in it. We discussed those and other things. Marcus had that Wednesday off, so he offered to sit on my property all day while I was at work. He called me around lunch. "You barely notice it," he said, "but it's getting bigger all the time." My Friday, the pond, was the size of a small lake. I have 10 acres of land, so I wasn't concerned about that puddle becoming a lake being an issue until Friday. The obvious thought hit me like a sack of underwater metal. What if it keeps growing? Sooner or later, it would intrude on someone else's property. Also, even though it seemed to be growing in the other direction, I was concerned it might at some point swallow up my house. But not only did its growth stabilize once it had gobbled up about half of my land, it was like it was intentionally avoiding my house. We finished out larger chunks of mechanical things. We got whole pieces of engines together, something that looked like a bicycle without wheels, an assortment of different sized chains, and a container with circuitry whose original use was unknown to us. They were also covered with a layer of grime, always corded. Sometimes things bubbled and broke the surface without our interference. Marcus said they were fish. Julie said fish didn't make shapes like that. A couple of weekends after we had first watched those VHS tapes, Julie and Marcus stayed over at my house again. It was supposed to be a weekend of us figuring out what to do. I didn't want to contact the government. I didn't want to involve them when I might be blamed for what happened. Against our better judgment, we watched both tapes again. We tried to relax. The next morning, it was clear that there had been a break-in. I found puddles by the doorway that continued into my house, as if something wet had walked over the floor. Along with those puddles of filthy-looking water, it left behind more of those metal bolts and globs of amorphous anchor, of course, and it left that behind in my house. Marcus and Julie accused me of not locking the door. Every night since those VHS tapes were delivered, I have locked my doors and triple checked that they were locked. Tellingly though, the lock had been pried out of the doorway as if by some tool. That break-in freaked us out further. We began to contemplate the logistics of filling in the lake with dirt, with concrete, whatever it took. The following days were relatively uneventful, the lake's growth having been stabilized, though a few times I thought I heard something moving around outside of my house at night. And once I could have sworn I heard this gurgling whirl, like an underwater turbine, coming from the direction of the lake. Through text messaging, we continued working out the cost of the dirt or concrete we would need if we decided to fill it in, though it seemed less and less of a concern of Julie's and Marcus's the longer they stayed away from my house. We avoided talking about it over the phone. Then one day Julie called to tell me she was pregnant. "It's ours?" I said. "Yeah," she said. "It's ours." 18 weeks passed. During that time, I definitely saw something come out of the lake at night and turn towards a house before slipping back into the water. I started to avoid the lake completely. I no longer wanted to know what was submerged within. I destroyed those VHS tapes. Julie and I kept our pregnancy a secret, though that was getting harder to do. We had our reasons. We weren't sure how Marcus would react. 18 weeks, then came the ultrasound. I held Julie's hand on the other side while the ultrasound technician ran the coiled wand over her. We wanted to know if it was a girl or a boy. "Is this some kind of joke?" the ultrasound technician said. "Did you put this thing inside you?" Julie and I looked at the ultrasound screen. What we saw only somewhat resembled a human. Submerged in its own mother's fluids, it twitched mechanically. Julie was pregnant with an animatronic baby. Okay, I hope you guys enjoyed this story for today. Thank you for listening to this story. Now, huge thanks to the Redditor Rick the Intern for this amazingly well written story. I enjoyed narrating it today and I loved it. Thank you for letting me narrate your story, and please make more. Now, once more, I hope you guys enjoyed this story, and I will see you guys in the next story. So, don't forget to sit back, relax, and indulge in fear.